Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is William Keat of Law and Alchemy and commonlawconstitution.org. And this is part one, following the introductory part of this series, Understanding Individualism and Collectivism, a Required Step of Human Evolution. And as I said in the introduction, it certainly is a required step in order for us to get things straightened out for us. So this is part one, and we're going to talk about the issue of morality first, in order to establish some ground principles and where that comes from. So each of these sections, which won't be too long, it's just going to step through in a sort of logical progression as to why it is that an individualist ideology is a necessary thing for our evolution. It is a requirement of natural law. And it is important that we reject collectivist thinking. So as we progress through the sections, we'll get into that. So first of all, let's just tackle the issue of morality. Now, morality is really what we're trying to establish with morality is right and wrong behavior. Behavior that we can identify as what is going to get us into difficulty, and therefore what is a crime. Now, in order to identify that, and in a sense, I've already hinted at that, it is something we have to come to discover. Now, there are many people in society who think that morality is something that they can make up as they go along, which is a very dangerous belief, and it's something that's put out by Satanism. It's one of the top tenets of Satanism, where they try to propagate the idea into society that that morality is relative, and so they promote moral relativism, and that's a very dangerous place to go. It isn't. Morality is objective, and it can be discovered. And how can I say that? I can say it by simply the fact that if you take a very close look at the universe or at reality and how it operates, how human interactions work, you can see that there is a kind of a cause and effect in place. And what we're talking about here is the heart of natural law. So in other words, right and wrong behavior is determined by the consequences that you start to see. And sometimes these consequences are absolutely obvious. If you go and get angry with your neighbor and you go and thump them in the face, you're probably going to get a negative reaction from that. And that's obviously pretty obvious. But a lot of these causes and effects in natural law are much more subtle, and they take a lot longer to play out through dynamics. We might have time to get into some of those a little bit later on. We will get into the more subtle ones. But if you understand for the moment that therefore right and wrong behavior through consequence is something that we can come to discover and come to know and observe through understanding natural law more deeply. So what we're really trying to do is to determine what is right and wrong behavior. And we're doing that by discovering what those consequences are that nature provides us as messages back to us. So what I'm saying is that it's observable, and through those insights, those deep insights in many cases, this is all connected in a sense by the health of the individual, because our life and the health of our life and the health of ourselves psychologically and emotionally and spiritually is fundamentally connected to our morality and how we conduct ourselves. It's linked to right behavior through our conscience as well, and we have conscience to determine that as well. So what we're actually coming to understand is that or at least we're trying to determine is what is therefore a crime under natural law. What would the universe determine is a crime? Okay, and essentially what we're saying there is it's wrong behavior. We've been talking about right and wrong behavior. It's anything that isn't right behavior. And so crime is where you're not getting this right. So I've sort of got that the wrong way around there, haven't I? Crime. So what we're actually saying is you need to get this wrong. Cause no harm or cause no loss, act in honor, and call out wrongdoing. That's good. That's what we should be doing. But crime is not doing those things. He's getting that wrong, isn't it? Yeah. And that's essentially what we're saying. And it's therefore quite a simple line for us to remember. Cause no harm, cause no loss, act in honor, and call out wrongdoing. That's a particularly important one, the last one. If you get that wrong, natural law does not it doesn't deliver nice consequences to you if you get that one wrong in particular. Okay, you can't sit on the sideline when you know that wrongdoing is occurring and not call it out. It's really important to identify it and not to prop up the continuation of that by just not saying anything, remaining silent. You know, the universe does not doesn't reward you for that by any means. Okay. So what we're really saying is that the health of an individual is all connected. Now, why is that? Let's just go into that a little bit more. It's quite obvious that this is objective. So if you conduct yourself immorally, in other words, you get those things wrong and you do cause harm or loss to somebody else, you're not acting in honor with integrity, and you're not calling those things out, then what's likely to happen is that you become distrusted as an individual. You're not trustworthy. And it means that you're not depended upon. And importantly, this is not only by other people, and that's true within the community, but also by yourself. Okay, it means that you can't actually trust yourself either. And what does that mean? It means that you have the potential to lie to yourself, quite often in small, tiny ways. It might be that you exaggerate things and you tell yourself certain things that you want to hear. Okay, and what that means is that you then take actions and steps from that position of a lie, and that causes all kinds of chaos in one's life. And actually, human beings, we have a tendency to do that a lot more than we would like to believe, in fact. But obviously, the most obvious thing is what you're doing with other people. So if you're not trusted, you don't stick to your word, or you don't, you're not trustworthy in other ways. You're not solid, reliable. You can't be depended upon by others. Then that's not going to go well for you. If you are trustworthy and dependable, then people will reach out to you. They'll want to work with you a bit more. They'll want to share information and ideas with you. They'll want to share their assets and their everyday things with you, which makes your life more straightforward. You know, it oils the wheels, doesn't it? Okay. So you can see how there's a direct relationship between the way that our life goes and the sort of state of chaos in our lives or not, and the state of how you conduct yourself. This is a really key thing, and it's something that often people don't think about, but it's actually observable, all of this. Okay, so we've talked about what the edges of that behavior are. Now, this is what I've just hinted at that describing rights is important to do that in the negative, because if you think about it, what is right behavior? Right behavior is absolutely anything where you are not causing a problem to somebody else, where you're not committing a crime. Well, what could that be? It could be absolutely anything. It could be billions of things. Okay, so therefore, describing right behavior is an exhaustive exercise. You're never going to get there. You're just going to be doing it forever. Yeah, so it's not an effective thing to do to describe rights. But what one tends to do in this sort of situation where you've got a massive field of possibility, what you actually do is describe the edges of that by describing what rights are, for example, but in what we call the apophatic, by describing what rights are not. And so in the negative. So therefore, we're describing the boundaries or the limits of right behavior. Yeah. And that's called putting things into the apophatic. And so that's something to think about, actually, when it comes to when your rights are described by for example, a constitutional document. If it's trying to describe rights, then it's going to get itself into a mess. It's not efficient to do that. So what you should be doing is the opposite. And that's why you can see above the cause no harm or cause no loss, act in honor, call out wrongs. Some of that is actually expressed in the negative. In other words, what you shouldn't do. Yeah, and often if you think about it, the 10 Commandments is in the Bible is expressed that way in the negative for that reason. Yeah. Okay, so now what we should do now is to just take this back to first principles. So let's imagine, for example, we don't actually have a sort of a man-made procedure system of law. We don't have a court system. Imagine that we don't have that. Let's strip this right back to an island where we have two people, and it's quite obvious that we can see that if person A on the island has gone and collected some pineapples or something, it would not be right for person B to bash person A on the head and take his pineapples. That would be criminal. That would be a wrong thing to do. And that's actually pretty obvious. But we can start to see and extrapolate that in that situation, if you were to have 5 people and then 10 people, it's exactly the same. It makes no difference, obviously. And if you were to have 100 people, that would also be the same. If one person were to do that to the rest, that would be obviously criminal. Now, also, you can say, for example, if one person sort of got together with about 20 other people and they all decided certain things should be handed to them or given to them by the rest, that would also be criminal as well. And so you can see that as you expand these first principles in numbers into a much bigger scale, and let's face it, you could go, could go right up to sort of 60 million or something or beyond, and it doesn't make any difference. If you've got an individual, or if you've got, a few thousand or even a few 100,000 that are deciding for themselves what others should hand over or do, that would also be considered a crime. Yeah. So these are important things to understand where your right behavior comes from. It's really important to take it back to first principles. So what we're saying is that right behavior is what your rights are. Okay, and that's how you determine what is a right. A right is anything that would be considered right behavior, and right behavior, as we've already discovered, is anything that isn't a crime where you're hurting somebody else. Yeah, so this is where it becomes quite objective, and it's where it would start to prick your conscience doing those things. Okay, and it's not just the obvious things like taking people's stuff, hitting them, causing physical damage. There are more subtle things like lying to people, because actually what it all is, in fact, is removing somebody's choices. It's kind of boils down to stealing, really, stealing their safety, stealing their choices. Much of this really comes down to that. So what we're actually saying then is that rights, your rights therefore exist in nature. Yeah, nature provides them. You are born with them. That's what we mean by your natural rights, or your inalienable rights, as some people call them. The reason why they're inalienable is because you can't alienate yourself from them. They're actually part of you by the very fact that you've been born. Okay, so that's what we mean by natural rights. And it's quite clear from the logic that we've seen here. When looking at natural law, you can see that it is something that is observable. And therefore, it's really important, that last point you can see on the screen there, rights are not given by government. Yeah, government doesn't have the authority to decide what your rights are, what the limits of your rights are. It's not for them to decide that. It's not for somebody else to decide that. Your rights exist. Okay, and this is a fundamental error and mistake on their part. You could say that some know this perfectly well and try to do it nonetheless. Yes, of course, that is the case. But there are actually vast numbers of people who operate within our governments, our modern governments, who just simply don't understand this. They've never stepped through this logic properly. Yeah, they cannot and do not have the authority to give you your rights or take them away or limit them in any sense. It's not for them to do so. They don't have the moral authority to do it. And yet, we can look at all sorts of modern constitutional documents that purport to do that, that claim to do it, that pretend to do it. And I was on a very interesting call just recently with a fine group of Canadians, and we were discussing the 1982 Charter of Liberties and Freedoms, or whatever it's called. which was put in place relatively recently over there in Canada, and it's an absolutely shocking document. It's not at all constitutional. It's totally illegitimate for that reason, because what it is government feeling that it's entitled to decide what people's rights are for them, which is absolutely not the case at all. So there we are. That's the end of that first section on morality. In part two, we'll be getting into what happens when you start to distort the landscape or start to claim that your morality doesn't come from nature. Things get quite interesting. So see you on that part, and I hope that's been useful for you. Cheers for now.